Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Football Podcast. My name is Josh Norris. That's John Daigle. That's Ian Hartitz, gentlemen. Playoff football has happened. We're here to talk about it. How are we feeling?
Man, 3 or 4 of those games were just awesome. I know Seahawks, Eagles let down a little bit, but not. If you can get 3 or 4 really good like that, you'll take it.
It was good just to have 8 teams that mattered, as opposed to watching teams that did not matter whatsoever every single day.
2 overtime games, all within one score this weekend. We couldn't have asked for anything more. We also had some news on this Monday morning. Perfect timing for our podcast. Thank you, Jerry Jones, for dragging your feet all throughout last week with the relationship with Jason Garrett and letting him off easy. Well, now we know that Jason Garrett is out as the Cowboys coach and Mike McCarthy is in as the Cowboys coach. Why don't we start there? Why don't we start with the most latest news?
Sure. I heard that, and who knows if this is true or not, but I did hear the only reason they were dragging their feet because they offered Garrett a front office position, which makes sense given how often he eats dinner with their families. That's the way that organization is comically run. However, he only wanted to be a coach. But now we have Mike McCarthy coming in, who, as we talked about in the past, had the best PR team of anyone this offseason.
Yes.
And I'm not sure. I'm a firm believer that all men deserve a second chance. It's just that I also believe that not every man changes with that second chance. So I'm not truly sure what we're getting. I do know, though, that at least they will have Dak Prescott with McCarthy. And as we know, in his last 4 years with the Packers, they didn't run play. They were always bottom 6 in play action 3 of those 4 years because, as we know, Aaron Rodgers hates turning his back to the quarterback. Whereas Dak, his most efficient play calling was from play action this year. So I think that's a plus, and that's certain to change.
You mentioned kind of the PR run that Mike McCarthy has had here in recent weeks, and it was in the final few weeks of the season when it was super evident that he wanted to get back into coaching after taking a year off. He hired the staff, basically, of
the Mike McCarthy project.
Yes, of other fired football coaches.
Yeah.
I mean, a long piece with Peter King, a long piece with Tom Pelissero. We know who Mike McCarthy has been on the field, and you mentioned a few numbers. But based on this hire and a lot of people's possible optimism or team's optimism in McCarthy, it's based on how he can change and what he might do differently and if he can follow through on what he's said he's going to follow through on. And I'm not sure if I can believe that until I see it, because so often we hear these things, and once the games start, once the process does not win immediately, then teams and coaches and players go back to what they know previously.
The one encouraging sign I've seen here, and shout out to Ben Baldwin, New Age Analytical on Twitter, but, I just thinking back by McCarthy, I always remember these boneheaded kind of decisions, conservative nature at the end of games, but overall, he actually was ahead of the curve on 4th down aggressiveness, and this is a guy who, maybe it is the PR stunt, but he has talked about, embracing analytics more. He stopped by the PFF offices during the offseason. He's done a lot of things that, if he does, take these into his approach and, put them into the Cowboys system, could definitely be good. Question is, will he do that? The big problem here, though, is calling this guy a quarterback whisperer when he's coached Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, 2 of the top handful of off-script quarterbacks probably to ever play a position. Here are the other quarterbacks that he developed in Green Bay that threw at least one regular season pass. So sorry, was it Brian Brome?
Yes, Brian Brome.
Brian Brome did not throw a regular season pass by being second round. But here are the guys that did. Matt Flynn, Brett Hundley, Scott Tolzien, Joe Callahan, B.J. Coleman, Graham Harrell, Deshaun Kaiser, Ingle Martin, Craig Nall, and Seneca Wallace. Yeah. Hopefully Dak Prescott is a real deal, because I'm not all that confident that McCarthy is going to elevate him much more than he's already at.
Graham Harrell, who I'm still trying to pass, is the most famous person to come from Ennis, Texas, and I never will. He's just always going to exceed my life.
I'm super nervous that this is just the coaching version of off-season storylines of a quarterback changing his mechanics, shortening it up, tightening it up, not as much of a wind-up, changing their base. And again, that makes me nervous. But it's also we also need to talk about the fit here, because the Cowboys, after likely knowing they were going to move on from Jason Garrett, only interviewed 2 coaches, Marvin Lewis and Mike McCarthy. And Mike McCarthy stayed the night Jerry Jones's house.
The most Cowboys thing ever.
This is the result of it. Now, there have been multiple people reaching out on Twitter with great comments, and I think it makes sense that with Mike McCarthy, he needs to change his clock management in key situations, pre-snap movement, getting running backs involved in the passing game. He tended to go with talent that was more experienced rather than young talent, got conservative with leads. But Daigle, we talk about this all the time. New coaches always want to implement their own staff. Is Jerry Jones actually going to allow Mike McCarthy to implement his staff? And we don't know the answer to that right now.
2 years ago, I would have said Chris Richard, there's a 0% chance that organization lets him walk. Now, I don't think they care either way after last season's performance. I don't think they have any ties to either him or Moore. I would imagine, just given his youth, Kellen Moore still sticks around. And he seems like someone that could potentially mesh with Mike McCarthy, this more progressive McCarthy we think we're getting. But defensively, they've already brought up Mike Nolan as a potential candidate, so who knows that's going to happen.
But who's going to call the plays? Because is Kellen Moore really going to take a demotion in his second season, really in this coaching role with the Cowboys, to not call plays? And is Mike McCarthy going to be the one like that? Those are the discussions I hope we find out moving forward, because Jerry Jones is still the most important piece of that organization, and he always is going to be. He's the owner, he's the GM, he's the voice, he's the person who's going to step in front of the media every single time. And that's a difficult situation to go into. And I wonder if McCarthy just wanted to be so back into coaching that he took this first job that was offered to him, and if it really is the right fit.
And that's the blemish on this. McCarthy reportedly didn't enjoy that last stint with the Packers because Thompson wasn't doing everything they could to get him help. Yeah. Whereas that's the good thing about this organization. True. You have endless resources at your disposal. Jerry just wants to win, especially with the life clock ticking down every single day. It becomes more and more important. However, he doesn't take this job. I would imagine he doesn't take this job if he doesn't already know that Jones is the first one the media talks to after games, that during games, Jones might come in and speak. He understands the power structure there. I would imagine he does anyways.
So how do we feel about McCarthy now that we saw Matt LaFleur in this Aaron Rodgers offense really not improve all that much? I mean, they got the first round bye, sure, but just statistically, yards per play, points per game, this is still on par with, the worst kind of McCarthy-Rodgers offenses we saw. So I know Rodgers had quite a few things to say about McCarthy's, intelligence and just kind of how they mesh, but we didn't see a transformation once they changed those coaches, so maybe we got to give McCarthy a little bit of credit there.
I think you can pinpoint certain differences, and using Aaron Jones in the passing game for stretches of the season really elevated that Packers offense this year. And also, I would argue that under Mike McCarthy, the wide receiver group was far superior to what the Packers had this season.
True.
So I don't know if it's a one-for-one comparison. I don't understand what you're saying. And Charles Robinson made a good point here. By the time that Andy Reid was leaving Philadelphia, everyone was kind of sick of him in Philadelphia, and he just needed a new start, new system, new players, new whatever, and it worked out completely in Kansas City. I think we kind of forgot how good Andy Reid is at calling plays, how he is at designing football, how he is at pushing the game forward when he was in Philly in those latter years. And then now in Kansas City, we've seen it explode. I'm not going to say that Mike McCarthy is on the same level as Andy Reid in terms of, I think, one of the more underrated coaches of the last decade, but it is a possibility. Things change when you go to a new place.
Belichick and Carroll as well. Did you mention those?
No, I didn't.
Oh, yeah, those are also second gig guys who now who obviously responded. So perhaps just a fresh new start could help McCarthy. I'm not excited with optimism. I'm excited to watch it play out because this is a man who has promised change to everyone nationally and publicly. So will those things actually happen? I can't wait to see.
Real quick, this is one of the best parts about this whole saga was Ian Rappaport's tweet announcing it. The Cowboys have officially fired Coach Jason Garrett, and Garrett has allowed them to do so.
You guys are low-key Cowboys fans. Low-key. We don't talk about it often enough.
Chill out,
I don't
man.
like to.
And you deny that you're a Panthers fan.
So what's your feeling? Are you happy with this hire?
I feel better about it the more I read along. With that said, would have been happier with Lincoln Riley or one of these more, trying something new and different, but who even knows how realistic that was.
It was a 12-hour roller coaster of emotions because I was on the feed just kind of scouring some stuff last night, at 3 a.m. And Schefter had that late night tweet about the coaching search, and embedded in the middle of that article that no one read, apparently, the Cowboys also had a phone conversation with Jeff Fisher. So I saw that at 3 a.m. was like, there's no way I wake up and this ends well. And then I woke up to Mike McCarthy. It's like, okay, I feel better about it. So, like I said, not optimism, excited to see how it plays out because it's a new wrinkle for this organization. And it could have gotten much worse. It could have just gone right back to these old steps the Cowboys are used to running.
Obviously, we're going to talk about every single head coaching hire when they do happen. But on the whole, I do want to make a statement that I think it's completely unpredictable. We don't necessarily know who these teams are going to be with these new coaches because there's so many dynamics going on behind the scenes, especially with the Cowboys. I mean, maybe more than any other team, the head coach does not have the voice of the team like the owner does. But if there was anything we know about the Cowboys this year, it's that the coaching held them back. It's that the decision-making held them back. And if that can be improved at all, hopefully this extends the Cowboys winning to win just a little bit.
And as with these doors open throughout the next coming weeks on Twitter and everywhere else in fantasy, just remember there are some people that are going to overanalyze it. It's important to analyze it, but don't overthink the coaching for fantasy. For every O.J. Howard doesn't fit in Bruce Arians' tight end scheme, there's also a Darrell Bevel now helping Matthew Stafford turn back into an elite quarterback. So just be careful.
Let's go to our game wrap-ups. I will say, Sunday night was an enjoyable night for me. Did not have to call all of you. Did not have to put that podcast together at 1 a.m.
Game ended at 8:30.
Yeah, and I had to go back and we'll get to that. But I had to go back and watch the early game because I missed that live.
I know why.
But let's talk about that early game. We'll start with Sunday, then go back to Saturday. Just for that's the most recent one that's happened. So why not freshen our memories a little bit?
Yeah.
All right, Sunday afternoon, the Minnesota Vikings beat the New Orleans Saints 26-20. In overtime. This was the game that the highest spread of the weekend. I believe it was 7.5 where it closed. Ian, so many of us, including myself, thought that the New Orleans Saints were the most complete team of this weekend of play, offensively, defensively. And at home, in that dome, we thought in many ways they were unbeatable. Well, they got beat.
I mean, I disagree with you. I wrote an article last week, who is the most complete team in the NFL, and I came on the Vikings. And obviously, the big issue with that was Kirk Cousins. I said the first paragraph about him. I'm surprised with this, too. And this was a worst-case first-round matchup because Dalvin Cook against the Saints' run defense that has held pretty much anyone. I mean, they held Dalvin Cook to 3.4 yards per carry. I know he had some nice runs in the first half, but really wasn't, super effective throughout the game, and that's kind of what ended up leading us to overtime. But at the end of the day, it was Kirk Cousins making really big plays when it counts. And, I know kind of sounds as storyline-y, but that's what happened. He hit Thielen for that 43-yard just teardrop deep ball that couldn't have been more beautiful, and then got Kyle Rudolph perfect thrown fade to end the game. So, they were joking, it wasn't Monday night, so Kirk Cousins was able to get the W in a big game, which all fun and games, but hey, Kirk Cousins, when he needed to, got the biggest win of his career.
He outplayed Drew Brees.
And I think everyone, including Aikman, noticed, except for the Saints defense, that Kyle Rudolph was one-on-one in a corner at the top of your screen in overtime. And who knows how that plays goes most of the time. But for this time, when it mattered the most, it was one-on-one and it was a lob ball and he came down with it.
Well, let's talk about that. Because if there is going to be a rule in the offseason, a process in the offseason, when pass interference can be reviewed, can be challenged, and in that situation it cannot be challenged, it has to be reviewed up top. What is the purpose of having that if in that moment it is not used? Because it is pretty clear. Multiple rules analysts, Mike Pereira, even our own here at NBC, mentioned that should have been offensive pass interference. It wasn't with two hands. It was one hand, but he clearly pushed off, extended his arm, Kyle Rudolph did, went up and caught that pass with the separation that he created by that arm extension. I'm not arguing if pass interference should or should not be reviewed or how it necessarily was reviewed this entire season. But if this rule was put into place this offseason and not used in that moment, what are we doing here?
I mean, it's just been the case all season. We've seen how many reviews that clearly pass interference happened that they didn't overturn. I mean, I'm with you. I don't have a good answer for what they're doing in this review system. They probably never should have put it in the first place. Right. But now these are the types of things that happen with it because there's so many more avenues where things like this can happen that previously, we just had to get past. So I don't know.
I don't think even the league could answer, unfortunately, and they created this so-called rule. It's just been inconsistent this year, and thus it's been consistent because no one knows what's going on. So even in that moment, I didn't think to the refs. I thought about how a single play ended the Saints' playoff run the past 3 years. I thought about that. But other than that, it's just like, yeah, of course. It's just the refs. I think that's every week.
I think that's letting the Saints off a little easy, though. We've now seen back-to-back years where when they finally faced a defense that said, you know what, Drew Brees, you've had a great career, you're a Hall of Famer, but we're going to force you to throw the ball over the top, and we're going to take away Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, the best of our abilities. They haven't been able to do anything. I mean, he's averaged 6.2, 6.3 yards per attempt these last 2 years. A little bit is, okay, who is that second guy? We haven't seen Traquan Smith step up the way I think some people thought. Ted Ginn's getting older. I mean, they're using Deontay Harris and Taysom Hill literally as their kind of next closest guy. guy. And all respect to Jared Cook, but they need to add another true wide receiver to this offense.
And I thought it could be Jared Cook because at portions of the season it was Jared Cook. But until that fourth quarter, I think he had just 1 or 2 catches in the game. He wasn't getting utilized until they were down by 10 points in that fourth quarter. It was Taysom Hill, though, in this game. Taysom Hill, and we talked about this when Drew Brees went down, that we thought Taysom Hill might be unleashed in those moments. He actually wasn't. He was utilized the least in the entire season because they wanted to focus the offense around Teddy. But once Drew Brees has come back, especially in the last 3 or 4 weeks, Taysom Hill did just about everything in this game. I believe he carried it for a 3rd down conversion. He ran other quarterback powers. He caught that 20-yard touchdown. He was a lead blocker in some situations. He threw.
He was the second best quarterback on the field.
He was the second best quarterback
and maybe the best running back on the Saints. Alvin Kamara gained 21 yards on 7 carries. Let's put some blame on him, too, if we're going to throw Brees under the bus. I hear you.
The Vikings as a whole, the front 7 played incredible.
And I love that Troy Aikman consistently, and it was worth repeating, how the Vikings were deploying their pass rushers. Because we know that at tackle, Teron Armstead and Ryan Ramczyk are 2 of the best in the league. And the Saints had dealt with offensive line injuries throughout this entire season, but somehow they were still able to maintain success. Well, Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin shouted out the Atlanta Falcons when I believe Drew Brees was sacked 6 times in that game. And often was pressured because he was disrupted up the middle. Now, all quarterbacks are worse when they feel pressure up the middle, but especially Drew Brees. When you see him consistently week in and week out climb the pocket with edge rushers working around the pocket, the athletic tackles riding them around the pocket, and then he just fires down the field. Well, now you have Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin working on the inside against those guards, against those centers, and against the inside short of the tackles, and it worked out tremendously in this game.
Every quarterback is worse against pressure for the most part. It's just a matter of can you extend the play further and hope something happens? And we saw when he started Wild Card Weekend, which we'll get into later, Deshaun Watson, who did everything against pressure single-handedly, whereas Brees literally could do nothing. And Aikman mentioned this as well. I do wonder how much it throws Brees off at his age and whatnot, his thumb injury, whenever Taysom Hill comes in, takes a snap, and then Brees gets out of the rhythm, comes back. Because remember, after that big Taysom Hill play, Drew Brees came back into the 20, and that was the deciding factor was that throw that just went backwards and he lost. So I do wonder how much that actually took him out of the game flow.
Yeah, I think Minnesota and Philly kind of had similar defenses this year. I think Minnesota is definitely better as a whole, but we got to be careful about assuming teams can just throw on these defenses that have bad cornerbacks, because if the pressure is good enough, you're not going to be able to throw the ball. And we saw that where, and this is more of a Saints problem, but Xavier Rhodes had a nice pass breakup where you could tell he did not think Michael Thomas was going to run past him for even a second. They were just sitting on his underneath routes, and you add pressure under that, and there was nowhere they could throw the ball.
I really think that the Viking superstars outplayed the Saints superstars. This was the first time, I believe, since week 6 that Dalvin Cook and Adam Thielen were on the field at the same time. Adam Thielen completely torched Marshawn Lattimore for much of that game. Marshawn Lattimore then exited right before that deep Adam Thielen touchdown, which I believe Troy Aikman, it wasn't touchdown, long reception, that Troy Aikman called Kirk Cousins' best throw of his career. Kirk Cousins outplayed Drew Brees. Dalvin Cook outplayed Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray. It was a situation, and Danielle Hunter, that play after the long Taysom Hill gain, that play where Danielle Hunter strip sacked Drew Brees in the backfield and caused that turnover cannot be understated.
Second most pressures all season. He's been doing this all year.
And Danielle Hunter is the fastest, the youngest, I should say, player to 50 sacks in NFL history.
Stud.
He's someone we don't talk about enough. Coming out of LSU, was a run defender, was only, I believe, 20 or 21 years of age. And just the way he's emerged is something where this is a team that can be built to win on the road if Kirk Cousins continues to play free like he did in this game. And I kind of we're going to talk about the game, obviously, later this week in previews. Kind of like the matchup this weekend.
Also, real quick, we got to give Mike Zimmer some credit for this defense, because, Eric Kendricks, I actually asked some guys at PFF, their grading system was almost biased towards the Vikings. 3 of PFF's top 4 safeties this year all play on the Vikings. It's not just Harrison Smith anymore. It's Anthony Harris who stepped into a starting role for the first time. Jaron Curse, or whatever his name is. They have legit playmakers at all 3 levels of the defense, and that's what really helped them overcome their steps backward at cornerback.
I know we wanted to do in a proper burial of these teams that are going away now for the offseason, one good and one bad. I don't think that we need to touch on a good for the Saints. My one bad.
We do. No. Give us a good for the Saints. I mean, this is our tradition we have here on this podcast from now on.
I mean, it was nothing too crazy. I just think they have the infrastructure in place, honestly. I know there are question marks surrounding Sean Payton after this loss, which is one of many in the playoffs. Maybe we just say Tracy Porter is the only reason Sean Payton has a ring. But whatever the case is, the fact is, like, how many coaches outside of Belichick only have one ring? Like, that's the goal, right? A championship. Belichick is the one that is the anomaly. I think the infrastructure, though, Sean Payton signed that 5-year extension.
Right.
Everything else surrounding him, you have Michael Thomas, you have Kamara, you have a defense now between Janoris Jenkins and Lattimore. Like, I think your key cornerstones of the franchise are in place. The question mark, though, is the one looming concern. No quarterback is under contract for 2020. Not one. Not Taysom Hill, not Bridgewater, not Breeze. So what do you do there? The obvious answer, and most likely answer, is obviously you just bring back Breeze. But do you bring back Hill, who outscored Breeze in 2 games, I believe, in the last 3 weeks in fantasy, who was, as we said, the second best quarterback on the field to Breeze, a key factor. And where does Teddy Bridgewater go? So I don't know. I think it's curious what they do under center moving forward.
Well, and now that the Cowboys already have a head coach, then I think that ends any Sean Payton speculation
Correct.
anywhere else. And he was obviously under contract, so some type of compensation when he'd change hands in that regard. We've been here with Drew Brees before, though.
Yep.
Like, he basically has control of his own ending, wherever he wants to go. And it would be surprising for him not to just be back here with New Orleans. But the Taysom Hill one is an interesting situation because he was the spark in this game.
Yeah, I mean, Sean Payton literally talked about, I think Payton said in the broadcast, they wanted to use Hill's big arm to help stretch the field. I mean, that's something that Breeze can't really do at this state in his career, and Hill gives him that.
And we've seen Sean Payton flirt with quarterbacks in the past as well. He was very in on Patrick Mahomes when he was coming out of the draft. I'm sure he's loved other quarterbacks at that time. Is there going to be a situation where they do draft, and they probably can't draft a player to be that heir apparent to Drew Brees? Because it's getting to that point. You know, there were times this season where Drew Brees did have that vertical arm. Was not in this game at all.
It wasn't even the vertical arm this game. It was the mobility. Like, he didn't have a chance.
Yeah. I still remember when they traded up to 13 or whatever, and everyone thought it was for Lamar Jackson. They grabbed Marcus Davenport, who unfortunately couldn't play. I was going to say one of the good things, you mentioned the defense being there. If they had Davenport, Sheldon Rankins was gone for the season. Kiko Alonso got hurt like in the second quarter. The defense is good enough to get them where they want to go, I think. If everything clicks right, they can do it. But I think you're right, though. They can more or less run it back and have another team that can contend.
I mean, I think the defense was the reason why a lot of people picked them for the Super Bowl run, because we already factored in that they had to go to Green Bay. Like, they had to go play 2 road games, essentially, to get to the Super Bowl, and that was going to be on their defense. And, they were just outplayed.
Well, and losing Marcus Davenport and Sheldon Rankins down the stretch was pivotal because, I mean, the reason that they traded up for Marcus Davenport was to have that little extra edge defensively. We need to move on. I will say, I was on a date during this game, and so it was fun to go back and review this game knowing what the outcome was going to be and to figure out how the teams got to that point. So it was like one of those weird, the
So you weren't seeing any, were you even hearing anything at the time?
No, I showed up when overtime started, got back to my place at that point. So it was fun to not even watch that, but just go back at the end and know the outcome, but just watch the story of how it unfolded.
Josh, how'd it go?
Yeah, what was the outcome of the date?
That's
what people.
No, you
already mentioned it. People want to know how it went.
No, I was just talking about, it was a different.
So it didn't go well.
So it went bad. It didn't go well.
It was standard. She certainly is not going to listen to this podcast.
No.
It was good. I mean, do you want me to give you details?
Not after that.
Not
We went antiquing, and then we went to a provision store where it's like open.
Remind me to never go to a date with you. That sounds horrible.
Maybe this is why I am single. All right.
Rounded out the afternoon with some Premier League highlights,
Let's move on to the next game. This one ended Sunday, and it was the Seattle Seahawks going to Philadelphia and beating the Eagles 17-9. Look, this game, Daigle, completely shifted when Carson Wentz left with a head injury, a concussion, after the Jadeveon Clowney hit. We'll talk about the Seahawks, but that one really just changed the landscape and possibilities of this game.
I had to recap the Eagles last night on the Rotoworld news page. They're up now for 2020 outlooks. And I actually kind of left all of those blurbs feeling admirable for the Eagles. Like, it's amazing they got here. And then you look back and it's like, think of the surrounding cast of characters they had to use. Like Boston Scott, it took 4 injuries, Jay and Jai's return tour included, for him to even see the field in Week 14. And then he totaled 138 yards in a must-win game to get the Eagles into the postseason. Greg Ward had to go through their practice squad cycle twice, ended up with the team in Week 12, and outperformed J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who was drafted before DK Metcalf. Josh McCown, 40-year-old backup, comes in and, looks spry for a 40-year-old, to be honest, but so limited. Like, what are you going to do off the bench in a playoff game against Jadeveon Clowney? So it was just like they did what they could to get there. At that point, though, it was just a minor applause, and it's like, guys, like, this is the end of the road.
Yeah, some of the hot takes, just throwing Wentz under the bus and all this. Like, guys, he got hit in the back of the head and his brain rattled against his skull. Let's not question the guy's toughness in a situation like this. I don't think Wentz for a second even had a say in the matter. This wasn't like the guy had a knee bruise and you decided not to tough it out.
He threw for a career-high 4,000 yards with that group of people around him.
No
That's
D-Jax.
incredible, yeah.
D-Jax for one game. And he looked incredible. Alshon out half the season. Even, Nelson Aguilar, we make fun of him plenty, but that was still a starter that could not play for the back half
He had
of
a
the season.
2-touchdown game at one point, yeah.
And Zach Ertz obviously supremely banged up. It's wild that he was even
blood
on
in his urine. He came out for a playoff.
No Lane Johnson. Jordan Howard clearly wasn't healthy enough to even touch the ball.
And these were some other players. You mentioned Boston Scott and Josh McCown. Obviously, Greg Ward, Deontay Burnett had a catch in this game.
Yeah.
These are practice squad, end of preseason players that Carson Wentz was elevating the last few weeks, but just couldn't obviously finish this game. And Josh McCown could not do that because Josh McCown has always been this athletic quarterback. He's a great athlete. And there were multiple times where you could tell, like, thinking, we've all been there, thinking that you are still this young athlete and thinking you just have this same mobility and agility, yet every time he tried to do that, there was a Seahawk defender right in his face. Philly's defense played quite well.
Front seven,
Played really well. I think they did enough if Carson Wentz was in this game to obviously give the Eagles the chance. But the Seahawks, talk about injuries. I mean, the injuries to Chris Carson, Rashad Penny absolutely made their mark in this game because this is a team that we talk about every single week. Their identity is they want to run the football. Well, that resulted in backs, I believe, having 19 yards for 17 carries.
Yes, 1.2 yards per carry.
Russell Wilson was the highest rusher. And
Russell Wilson accounted for 95% of the Seattle's yards, yes.
I mean, Russell Wilson was absolutely dominant in this game. One of the best games I've seen him play.
Seattle, I was so angry during the game because it's typical Pete Carroll, trying to set up Russell Wilson to fail and Russell Wilson refusing to fail. Seattle had averaged 8.3 yards to go on third down, which would have been dead last in the regular season. Worse than Adam Gase's Jets offense at 8.1 in the regular season. And yet Russ went 9 for 13 for 14.9 yards per attempt on third down. Just a true godsend with DK Metcalf. And David Moore making splash plays on third down as well. I mean, that was truly one of the finest Russell Wilson performance, and we haven't seen it in some time. So the fact it happened, it was insane. Having said that, it was still a one-score game because it's Seattle. Like, this is what they do. They coach against their own detriment. Like, it's crazy.
Ian, the Eagles' secondary and defense put Seattle in difficult situations and favorable situations for the defense. Russell Wilson had a heavy hand in a 3rd and 11 conversion, 2nd and 18, 3rd and 10, 2nd and 11, which he scored a touchdown on, 3rd and 15, which was a run for the first down, 3rd and 10, and 3rd and 10. This was Russ cooking.
I mean, no one's been able to run the ball on the Eagles all year. Like, we knew this going in. On our preview pod, we knew this, and we just questioned, can Russ throw the ball enough? Will they give him enough chances to throw the ball for them to get the win? Luckily, they did, but you said this defense is good. And this kind of goes into our good and bad send-off with the Eagles, but the one bad thing with this Eagles team is they did not address cornerback last offseason at all. And I know it's because they had a bunch of injuries, and they thought, okay, let's get our guys healthy. Let's get Sidney Jones, Ron Darby, Jalen Mills, and Rasul Douglas healthy and see what they can do. I know they were still banged up again this year, but we've seen this enough. Like, please upgrade your cornerback position. Chris Harris, Ramsey, all these guys were available to trade deadline. They decided not to do it. Again, they gave up 17 points to Seahawks. It's not like this was an awful unit, but if I look at every single position group on the Eagles at full health, cornerback is the only one that I don't think is above average.
Nelson Aguilar is a free agent. I think they have to address wide receiver as well, even a secondary option, given how little Arcega-Whiteside offered them in his rookie year. Still young, of course, and still a promising secondary player. But yeah, corner for sure is the position they need to address the most.
And they kind of ran into the situation where they had so many players that came off the street and immediately played that they thought, well, we're going to return at corner with people who have a lot of experience on an NFL field. But the talent ceiling for that group is not very high. I remember going back to last draft season, and because I like to report and post where prospects are visiting. And like DeAndre Baker visited Philadelphia, Greedy Williams visited Philadelphia. And all Eagles fans were just screaming, no, we don't want a corner in the first round because we have all these guys that played. I hope the same situation, and it's not going to, you're not going to make the same mistake again, with how many pass catchers, running backs had to be forced in a similar role on offense this year, because Howie Roseman really needs to reflect on how many eggs he put in the Deshaun Jackson basket this year. And Jackson was going to blow up this year. I think we can all say that. Yet, he only played one game. And so having the depth there, which we thought this Eagles team was going to be super deep at multiple places, it just wasn't. So can't make the same mistake again this time on offense.
What is your good thing, something on the offense?
Carson Wentz.
Okay, I thought you were going to say Dallas Goedert, but yeah, that's the same
How
thing.
could we have expected any more than him to get this team to playoffs without your top 3 wide receivers, without Lane Johnson, with all these other injuries we talked about? I mean, we have seen when he is at his best, he is a legit MVP. He was the front runner when he was at his best. At the very least, he's a contender. And all that happened that year in 2017 was he actually had a healthy offense. He had Torrey Smith and a good version of Mac Hollins, not dominating, but at least forcing the defense to somewhat respect the deep ball, and he flourished with it. We've seen him for periods, set back, hit his drop, and make throws on time, in rhythm, keep the offense going. And then 2 or 3 times a game, he makes just plays off script that very few guys else in the league can even do. So, I don't know. I've seen enough from Carson Wentz, particularly just in this year. Like, he is going to help you contend for the playoffs, even in this situation. What can he do with a fully healthy team?
Totally. I mean, he always has the ability to elevate the people around him. In this game, I mean, it really did come down to the Eagles having drives end on the 8, the 20, and the 10, and none of those obviously finished in touchdowns. Before we move on, we haven't given enough love to DK Metcalf. Because this is a player who I have loved watching during his rookie season. Obviously, was a 64 overall pick. 8 receivers or 9 receivers were drafted above him this past April. At Ole Miss, he was glued to one side of the field. He was glued to the left side, ran vertical routes, and everything was based on that straight line. His early parts of his career with Seattle was exactly the same. They asked him to run slants and they asked him to run vertical routes. How Seattle worked with him and used him should be a lesson to everyone across the league. People last night started joking, you made too big of a deal, or people in general made too big of a deal of DK Metcalf's 3-cone and 20-yard short shuttle. I don't know if it's that, because 1, media members like DK Metcalf more than the NFL did. That's a fact. And 2, that actually fits his game. And you didn't see much this season when Seattle asked, DK to be Stephon Diggs out there, running this complex route tree. What they asked him to do is exactly where he wins. And in this game, it was running vertically, it was jump balls, and allowing him just to out-athlete a lot of cornerbacks out there. And he was able to do it. I absolutely have loved all these little tools that Metcalf has picked up along the way. And in year 2, it could be even better.
He ran 3 routes from the slot yesterday, and one of them was the 36-yard catch to ice the game, the final play.
And the other one was a touchdown. The other one was that vertical route for a touchdown. And they had run that play often this season near the goal line. They would put their tight end on the left side, then put him in the slot and ask him to run vertical routes, with giving him even more space along the sideline so he didn't have to create it himself and, again, just go up and win it. And this time they called that further away from the goal line, and absolutely worked.
He's more one-dimensional than a lot of wide receivers, but when that one dimension is way better than a lot of wide receivers, like, how can you not love that? And to me, I'm a little hesitant to give Seattle a ton of credit because he did fall to 64th overall. It's like how the Ravens knew Lamar Jackson. Well, they passed on Lamar Jackson twice themselves. So a little hesitant to give Seattle all the credit, but I think just the whole league, like, when you got a guy this big, this fast, good at running deep and doing slants, his floor was going to be an overqualified field stretcher.
And one more quick one. Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz, tight end 4, tight end 10 on the season. The first duo to do so as tight end 1s together since Aaron Hernandez and Ron Gronkowski.
He said it.
So yeah, next year, both considered tight end 1s in best ball leagues and season-long leagues.
Let's move on. Let's travel back in time to Saturday, where the Houston Texans beat the Buffalo Bills 22-19 in overtime. It wasn't that close for pretty long stretches of this game. I believe that at one point the Buffalo Bills were up 16-0 in this game. And it all started, Ian, with that first drive where it was just beautiful play calling by Brian Daigle. And it ended with Josh Allen catching a pass for a touchdown. I'm not going to say it crumbled from there, but in the second half, this game completely turned on its head.
Yeah, everyone wants to hang this loss on Josh Allen, and I get it. He definitely didn't win them the game, but I also don't know that he lost it necessarily.
He did. He lost in this game.
Really? He had one turnover. He ran for 92 yards, led the team in that. I mean, I know he should have had more than one turnover. I saw him throw the ball over his head in a must-win moment. But, the guy also made 2 or 3 throws that, like Carson Wentz, I mean, who else is making these plays?
This is why he lost them the game. And you know me. I love watching this Josh Allen roller coaster experience. But when you have that first drive, that first half, and there were actually 2 situations where it looked like he could have been intercepted or pick six in those spots, even in the first half. So, this was the perfect example of how turnovers are a lot of luck and a little random because sometimes corners catch them, sometimes they don't. But what it's always going to come down to, from a viewer perspective, Josh Allen is fun. It's entertaining. You don't know what to expect. You can get a pedal to the floor player at all times. Mm-hmm. But I could not imagine being a coach, a play caller.
What about defense?
And in that second half, calling plays with an expected outcome in mind or trying to predict what your quarterback does in those moments, and then having a quarterback that you have no clue what to expect as the final product. That's what it's always going to come down to with Josh Allen. And it goes back to that final situation where he took a sack on 3rd and 13 and also got intentional grounding in that moment.
The intentional grounding was the most egregious one.
And then in 4th and 27 decided to run further back to his own end zone and take another sack. He's someone that once the ball is hiked, once the ball is snapped, doesn't seem like he thinks in some moments. And you can't have that at the quarterback position.
To me, it was just the entire game, though. It was just a game of inches. I mean, there were so many different calls between the potential fumble, between John Brown not getting his feet down that Booger incorrectly attributed to Josh Allen. To open the second half, remember that weird play where they threw the ball to the ref, but he didn't actually kneel the ball, so they were about to give the Texans the touchdown, which would have ended the Texans game. They would have been down 20-0 at that point. They couldn't have come back.
He lost by 3 in overtime to a much better quarterback in a game that I think a lot of people didn't expect the Bills to compete in.
He was by far outperformed by Deshaun Watson, but I don't blame Josh Allen. That's just kind of what Josh Allen is, though. It's
he is.
There were so many.
But if you look at the moment, if you look at the reasons why, I mean, he had that fumble to start the fourth quarter. He had a near pick six in the first half, a near fumble in that second when his knee barely touched the ground. And again, I have highlighted why I love watching Josh Allen, and I don't get the constant hate of him, but I think that the criticism is deserved here because they had this game in hand, 16-0.
Right.
And you can point to other spots where, yes, he only had one turnover, but trying to lateral the football, we're not understanding you have a minute left and you're about to get a first down in your midfield, and it's the final play of the game. It's like a lack of awareness, and sure, it's just a second year.
There's a ton of lack of awareness.
But there's a total lack of awareness,
and
it showed up considerably in this game, and I don't know if it's ever going to change.
You have a quarterback got drafted. People laughed at the pick, said he was one of the most raw quarterbacks ever. His second season, he improved in every single passing category. Once they gave him a decent O-line, once they actually gave him some weapons. No, he's not the most polished quarterback. That's why we loved watching him. That's why we still do love watching him. I just don't like pretending that there was just all these other quarterbacks that would have just won this game for the Bills. I don't know how many you could say would have done that, because he did. He, for better or worse, keeps them in most of these games. He's the second best rushing quarterback in the league behind Lamar Jackson, and we just kind of he does that. And he's an average to slightly below average passer. To me, that adds up to, at the very least, a good quarterback.
Can you win consistently with an average to slightly below average passing game?
They did this year until they lost 3 points in overtime.
But once we get to this point in the NFL calendar,
right. The turnovers are a big deal. I understand that. It's huge on the postseason.
So we're just decisions.
You have to win the turnover battle.
Overall
in the
decisions.
And that's the thing is that you can't, as you said, you literally can't put a jar on Josh Allen. Like whatever you design, he could easily break that. We have no idea. However, like they don't build a 16-0 lead if it's not Josh Allen back there to begin with. So there were a lot of mistakes in the first half, and the first drive compared to the last drive was like roller coaster Josh Allen. Like a lateral to an offensive lineman compared to like a 40-yard run. Like they're so unique in different plays. But at the same time, it's just like, I don't pin that on him though.
And we've sat here for 17 or 18 weeks, and you guys know how I feel about Josh. Like I'm not one of these people who consistently just says he's bad.
Right.
But I think it's fair to criticize him in this spot. But more important than anything, this game, everyone played to their role. Obviously, we just mentioned Josh Allen and went through that entire story. Mm-hmm. Devin Singletary was great. Devin Singletary was winning out in space, was winning outside the tackles, was creating on his own in a lot of situations. But more than anything, Deshaun Watson played his role as well. Because you talk about, again, two different halves like we did with Allen, the good, then the bad. For Watson in this team's offense, it was bad and then the great. And a lot of the bad early on, I think, can be attributed to Bill O'Brien because there were so many instances, and I don't know what the play calls were. I don't know what the read was, but it seemed like so often when we see, like Brian Daigle in that first series, when you plan something out, when you game plan, so many quarterbacks are able to hit their primary reads or their first targets on design throws. Yet, so often, Deshaun Watson looked like, and we don't know, we couldn't see the coverage, hated what he saw on that initial read. And so in those instances, and yes, he always has a tendency to do this, but I think it's compounded by Bill O'Brien, drops his eyes, forced to be a playmaker, and have that mentality, and then it wasn't working in that first half. But then, typical Deshaun Watson, he carried this team in the second half.
I lost it in particular on the getting to the Bills 37 right after their opening drive, and then they punted. It's like that's when you just can't do that. However, and they were pretty quiet until midway through the third quarter. That J.J. Watt play that stopped the Bills inside the 20 on 3rd and 8, and then that next drive is the one that Deshaun Watson came out and had that miraculous touchdown run, coupled with the miraculous 2-point conversion on the following play. Like it was just pure Deshaun Watson outperforming his own coaching handcuffs.
I know Watson ran 14 times, so it's a little bit skewed to that, but how did he throw? He only had 25 pass attempts in a game they were down 16. Like Carlos Hyde had 16 too many carries in this game, as far as I'm concerned. And, I've been preaching free Duke all season. Duke Johnson had 3 carries for 38 yards, 3 receptions for 30 yards. He single-handedly got Deshaun Watson in the end zone on a 2-point conversion. He took out 2 defenders on 1 play with 2 beautiful blocks. I mean, look, even if you want to say Carlos Hyde is a better inside the tackles runner, which I think is a debate, but fine, let's say that. Just having a guy like Duke that forces the defense to defend him as a true receiver, to appreciate that part of the game and how he opens up the rest of the offense, I just think it helps so much. It's like Seattle to like a lesser extreme. Like just let Deshaun Watson be him, surround him with the most talented guys, not arguably the single worst receiving running back in the league.
Doesn't that start at the top though? Like doesn't that start with Bill O'Brien?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and that's concerning because so many of these miraculous plays that Deshaun Watson makes, it's not inside the structure of the play. And he is the one carrying in these games and in these situations Bill O'Brien. And I joked that somehow when they were losing 16-0, that Bill O'Brien was somehow going to end this game with even more power, like he's going to be the owner or something. Well, they ended up winning. And it's not because of Bill O'Brien they ended up winning. And maybe I'm not giving him enough credit. Maybe I'm being too critical here. But it's because Deshaun Watson makes a play like he did on that 2nd and 6, spinning against 2 defenders that were trying to tackle him, and then run it in. And it's not like this is anything new. We were sitting in a bar at this game, and he did the exact same thing against the Oakland Raiders. We got poked in the eye and threw a touchdown pass without an eye.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe an NFL quarterback has one of those players, or one of those plays in his career highlights. Deshaun Watson had 2 in a single season.
I know. Go further. Go to the very last play where he pins ball out of defenders tackling him, and then finds Tawan Jones along the sideline because apparently he said that Kevin Johnson, the Bills safety who played corner for the Texans last year, actually knew their plays, was calling out their own plays. So he had to avert that play, and he just found the third running back along the sideline. It hit him for a clutch third down conversion, like just insanity.
And look, he took 7 sacks, but we just got to remember when a quarterback's under pressure, they can try to extend the play, risk taking a sack, risk finding someone downfield. They can throw the ball away, hurt your completion percentage, nothing good happens, or they can try to force the ball into coverage and risk getting picked off. So I know it doesn't always look pretty for Watson, and then we see these great plays too, but just know there's more than one way to play quarterback, and I love the way Deshaun Watson
But there's a
does it.
difference, right? Because I don't think it's fair, and some viewers might be listening or watching and saying, well, look how they just talked about Josh Allen, or Josh did, how he talked about Allen and how he's talking about Watson. But I think that there's a totally different mindset and understanding of the play and like being aware in those moments. Because Allen just pedaled to the floor, going full force, 100% in every one of those situations. It seems like the game slows down for Deshaun in those moments. And that's the major difference between the two players.
It's cheesy to say this, but I do feel like just the way Josh Allen plays kind of is almost the identity of this Bills team, and it gets everyone to play harder. I'm just thinking of that QB sneak he had against the Cowboys earlier this year where he fumbled the snap, breaks like 2 tackles, and just trucks everyone. Like, there's something about playing that way, though, that I think energizes the rest of the team, even though I can't, quantify that.
There's a difference between holding onto the ball and then finding your running back along the sideline because the opposing safety knows the play, and holding onto the ball and launching a 40-yard bomb to a fullback.
Covered.
And double coverage, yeah. And that's the difference between Deshaun Watson and Josh Allen.
Before we move on to the next game, we do need to close out the season for the Buffalo Bills. The good to me, they have their identity. That's the number one thing that Sean McDermott brings to the table, and you can tell he's been building towards this moment for a long time with how he's built that defense in the same light as he built the one in Carolina. Fast linebackers, athletic linebackers in Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano.
Yep.
Interior disruptors and Ed Oliver now, and Jordan Phillips had a good season, and Starlo Tulele. And then in the secondary with Trey White, and obviously Levi Wallace wasn't in this game, but he has that identity. And I think that you can maintain that and carry that and hopefully build on that moving forward. Now, the bad, we've already discussed it a lot. And I love Josh Allen as a viewer, but it's the unpredictability that he brings to the table. And I'm not sure, I think he can consistently get to the playoffs year in and year out. But it's what happens when you play the best teams for 2 or 3 straight weeks once you get to the playoffs and the top defenses.
But if you don't have a top 5 quarterback, do you want a quarterback that can go between top 5 and bottom 5, or one that's just sitting at 15? I mean, I kind of want the volatility.
No, and I'm not saying they should replace him or think about replacing him at all. This is just what they have.
Yeah.
This is who they are. And again, we always go back to this, but if Joe Flacco can put together a 3-game stretch of playing perfectly, then Josh Allen can do the same thing. But again, there's the factor that Brian Daigle might not be back for this team, because I think there is a strong chance he ends up as a head coach, maybe even in Cleveland.
That is my big question mark, is if Dayball's gone, then you have to obviously bring in someone who's creative, because like this offense can only thrive if you have extremely creative play calling.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's a plus that Devin Singletary got to learn under Frank Gore for 1 year. I think that's huge for like off-season mentality.
Would just know how young this team is. I mean, Tremaine Edmonds, 21. Dawson Knox, just rookie this year. He's already shown. Tre'Davious White, first-team All-Pro. He's only been in the league a few years, so they're still getting better, I think.
The Houston Texans face off against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's Sunday at 3:05 Eastern.
Which, by the way, we'll talk about this later in the week, but if you think you're getting done with getting rid of Carlos Hyde, remember this game earlier in the year, 26 carries as they played keep away from Mahomes.
Goodness.
Revenge game.
It is.
The Chiefs cut him prior to the season.
They beat the Chiefs.
There we go. All right, let's close out this review pod with the Tennessee Titans being the New England Patriots, 20-13, really 14-13, because Tom Brady and his potential last throw as a New England Patriot threw a pick six. Obviously, he didn't have much time. He had to go full length of the field. It was a forced throw. We'll talk about the game in a moment, and there's a lot to talk about. But I think we have to talk about Tom Brady to start. This was a situation where I sat here last week with y'all, and for stretches of the season, I said that this Patriots defense is going to figure itself out because we always sit here and think that they won't figure part of their team out, but they ultimately do. But this is the most washed we've seen Tom Brady. There were a couple good throws, but when his arm has declined as his career has gone on in the later stages, it's his pocket movement and mobility and decisions against pressure that has kept him and this team afloat as one of the premier franchise or the premier franchise in the NFL. I think that in many ways that disintegrated down the stretch this year and in this game. And a lot of it is because of that offensive line, but I think some of it is because of Tom Brady.
With that said, if they score in that goal line stand, we're having a completely different conversation about how, look, Brady did enough to get him the win. I know what you're saying, but it's tough for me to write Brady off when he just had easily the fewest weapons of his entire career. Yeah. Everyone has loved this. You don't need a number one wide receiver to win the Super Bowl. Look at the Patriots. Well, they also had the best tight end of all time in Rob Gronkowski, so let's maybe not zero in on wide receiver as much as pass game weapon. And Edelman was playing on pretty much, shoulder, knee injuries. The reports of how banged up he was at the end of the year were just ridiculous. And then we didn't have N'Keal Harry, Mohamed Sanu, and we watched that game. They couldn't separate the entire time. So you want Brady to beat this Titans defense, throwing to a double-covered Edelman and checking down to James White and Rex Burkhead. No, I don't think he's as good as he was even 2 years ago, but it's just hard for me to say he's completely done and incapable of doing this until I see him just missing open receivers, because it wasn't like Brady's just missing wide open guys down the seam. It's, there's N'Keal Harry with the defender on his hip and they couldn't connect.
Well, and he's not done. He said he didn't say if it's with the Patriots or not, I'm still playing. He basically said that. No matter what, he's not retiring. Do you think he's coming back to the Patriots?
I'm not sure. I have the odds if you're interested.
Yeah, I want to hear the odds.
Just the top five. The Patriots are, 2-1 favorites, which is what we expect. But the next one, number 5, the Cowboys, not happening. Number 4, the Chargers. Number 3, the Vegas Raiders. Number 2, the Panthers. And then number 1 would be the Cleveland Browns.
That's all ludicrous.
That's the Vegas odds.
I could see the Chargers, but this ultimately comes down to two people. It comes down to what Tom Brady wants, but it also comes down to Robert Kraft. I don't really think, and we know how much of the identity of the Patriots that Bill Belichick is, but this is going to be a Robert Kraft decision in the end. Because this was a team that had Jimmy Garoppolo just a couple years ago and had the plan in place for the future. Obviously, they would have to give Jimmy G a contract to even get him to this point. And we don't know the management situation of that one, but almost certainly Robert Kraft was saying, hey, Tom Brady, we can still win games, win a Super Bowl with him, and they ultimately did. But is Robert Kraft, because the owner is the one who makes the ultimate decision on quarterbacks. We've seen that with good teams. We've seen that with bad teams. And right now, we don't know the answer. I think he ultimately looks at other teams, Brady does, but does return to New England.
And remember, Belichick was openly frustrated about the Garoppolo trade. Did not want to see him gone. I think he comes back, even though the one voice that continues ringing it, that he is looking elsewhere, is Adam Schefter. The one voice we need to listen to is the one person actually saying, no, he's weighing all his options. But yeah, they just don't have another option. And I was thinking about it this morning. The only person I can see him giving $30 million at this stage of his career is Robert Kraft, just for the lore.
And I don't think this Patriots team is that far away from contending again. They're going for another ring. The defense was obviously good enough. Derrick Henry went that crazy, and they gave up 14 points the entire game.
Yeah.
So defense is there. They need to improve the pass game weapons. The offensive line, I think, as they just mature a little more this next year, hopefully have a little better injury luck, could be better. I think this was the worst. Even if they ran back this exact same offense next year, I'd feel like it'd be a little bit better just based on better injury luck. And if you can add some pieces, then all of a sudden you could be back to being an above average unit.
We're mixing things here because I don't know if the defense is going to be back because it's an aging defense. And defense year to year as a top unit, not sticky, as we've come to learn a little bit. But also, Devin McCourty is 33 and a free agent. Calvin Noy is 29
and a free agent.
Jamie Collins is 30 and a free agent. Danny Shelton, 27 and a free agent. I can keep going down.
And go Matthew Slater, the most important special teams player in the entire league. He's a free agent.
Right. This was another window to win. And, if we took a step back, eliminated the name, we saw that this wasn't going to happen with New England this year, and obviously didn't. Let's talk about the Titans. There's a lot to talk about with the Titans. I'm so glad they made it in the playoffs. I'm glad they're advancing. They're a fun football team. And so much of it rode on Derrick Henry's shoulders to the tune of 34 carries, 182 yards, and a touchdown. And Daigle, there was a drive at the end of the second quarter with about 2 minutes and 20 seconds left with Derrick Henry racking up all 75 yards in that drive that ended in a touchdown. Just an absolutely unique player that is a joy to watch.
Derrick Henry has 66 carries in the past 2 weeks, both must-win games to get the Titans in the playoffs and beyond. The funny thing is, this is the #1 red zone offense since Tannehill took over under center. And given, despite the flaws, 15 pass attempts, 75 passing yards, whatever the case, they still went 2 for 2 in the red zone against the Patriots, including Tannehill's precision throw to Anthony Ferkser to score the first touchdown of the game. So it's still, their strengths are still their strengths. The question are, when you move on to Baltimore, Baltimore's red zone defense is also strong. But for this time being against the Patriots, that was still an identity, and they fed to that identity and didn't miss a beat.
And look, that was all the Patriots wanted to do is stop Derrick Henry. We even saw them do it in 2017 when the Titans were on a similar run. Derrick Henry, Marcus Mariota got him that win in Kansas City. Last time we saw Alex Smith out there, and then all of a sudden 12 carries, 28 yards in Foxborough. But no, they just couldn't stop the guy all game. And we knew it from the first drive on when, whenever Derrick Henry is getting 3-4 yards untouched, that's a problem because no one can take that guy down without him falling forward for another 3 or 4.
There are a lot of smart people out there in the football media. I learn a lot from smart people. Yet, I kind of love it when, an offense passes for 71 total yards and the team still wins.
Yeah.
Because of 201 rushing yards and so much of it of Derrick Henry. Because to me, running the ball still matters. The running game still does matter when you have an identity like the Titans do with a talent like Derrick Henry. And this isn't going to change the way, one side views football or the other side views football. But I think that just this overriding belief that running backs don't matter, this game, and sure, just one game, shows you that that's not true.
Still, they scored 14 points with this performance. Running backs matter, but I think just the general idea with that is teams, it makes more sense to throw the ball more. And running backs need to matter enough to get that job. I think it's more of a fantasy football idea that running backs don't matter than in real life.
The Tannehill's play, though, I still think was good. I know the box score didn't show that.
He had about 2 or 3 pivotal throws that he
Yeah, he was such an important key to that win that you're not down on him at all heading into the next round against the Ravens.
I think they went with Mariota under center.
What do you mean you think?
I think they would have beat the Patriots if Marcus Mariota was under center.
Wow.
I don't think that at all, no.
You don't think he could have dragged him to 14 points? He did it 2 years ago.
Interesting.
I don't think so.
I don't know. That thought actually never even crossed my mind. But Tannehill did make 1 or 2.
I think Derrick Henry in the Wildcat all game could have potentially gotten that win.
I want to shout out Roger Saffold, who had a struggle session all year long. Mm-hmm. It was struggle city for him. After signing a big contract from the Rams. In this game, it seemed like pancake after pancake, getting the second level, clearing space. This is a difficult Patriots defense to run on because at times they have Dante Hightower working from the second level, then moving up as their nose tackle. Danny Shelton's tough to move out of the way. And then with Derrick Henry, you always have this back who is, and we were talking about this, Ian, you're on about your 16th beer, so you might not remember. Mm-hmm. But he just aesthetically moves different, Yeah. And I think that gives people, especially coming into the NFL, difficulty in projecting him. But he's always, if you just look at the yardage and if you just look up how quickly he's eating up the yardage, he falls forward on final contact for extra 2 or 3 yards. Mm-hmm. He's so difficult to bring down, and he's running away from people that are 60 pounds less than him.
Just when he got that screen behind the line of scrimmage, you knew it was going for 20-plus yards, and he went for 22. It's amazing they don't pepper him with screens more. It's incredible watching. That's why I don't mind this team moving up, because it's fun to watch them.
This isn't even the best version of the Titans that we've seen.
About to say, A.J. Brown, 1 target. Jonnu Smith, 2 targets. Corey Davis, I know people don't like
it was not the game
targets.
plan to throw, yeah.
But A.J. Brown just set all kinds of records. He's clearly one of the top wide receivers in the league. He needs to get more than one target. I mean, that's ridiculous.
I would imagine he does against the Ravens. And this game in particular, and I say this in hindsight because they won, but I didn't think he really needed to be used this game, though. Like, that's not how you were going to
I think you got to get him the ball, though, which they had done a good job all season. You know, we talk about Jonas Smith getting that freaking pitch lined up as a true running back. They've done a good job all year getting these guys, to getting their playmakers the ball more. That last game, you're right. They didn't need to. They obviously didn't need to. They won the game.
Yeah,
so they decided to give Brown's touches to Henry. So I get it, but I just think they got by this one, great. But if they really want to keep moving, we're going to need to see a more complete offense.
You're playing the number 2 DVOA offense next week, as opposed to the Patriots offense. Yeah.
The Ravens do take on the Titans next week. I think that's a far more difficult matchup for the Ravens than the Texans would have been. I think they just would have steamrolled the Texans. But this Titans team, they, depending on how they run their offense, you might get 3 possessions and a half. 6 or 7 possessions in total for an entire game.
Yeah.
And if you don't score points, that can be an issue. We talk about the Ravens secondary all the time. I'm not saying their run defense is bad at all, and I'm not saying the Titans are going to win, but this makes the matchup much more interesting.
It is the weakest point of that defense.
Yeah. Let's close this podcast out with just the good and the bad real quick, because that's how we're going to do it with all the teams this year with the Patriots. The good, we mentioned so much about Robert Kraft and Tom Brady. The good is you still have Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick, who I think, from what I've seen, is the greatest head coach of my lifetime, who shows the ability to change game plans week in, week out, season in, season out, depending on his opponent. And I think he's the most important member of that franchise. And I don't think that that's debatable. So no matter if you have a new quarterback, a new roster with a lot of these aging players, I am excited to see Bill Belichick kind of having to restart in certain areas, because we haven't seen that, because the Patriots' window to win has just been expansive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was my good for them was kind of building on that. Just he got that defense. I agree with you. Elite defenses year to year are not always super sustainable, but wasn't that long ago that we saw his team lose to the Eagles, give up over 500 yards in the Super Bowl. I mean, just based on what we saw last season and that ended playoff run throughout this season, they've gotten the defense back to kind of what we expect from the Patriots.
And yes, the defense is a strength. I still concern myself about the offense. Maybe that's the bad. I don't know.
Well, yeah, the bad is, one, the offense. Who are the difference makers on offense to build around?
Right.
I don't know if there are any at this moment.
And Kill Harry, your first-round pick.
Edelman's fine.
Edelman's fine, but what?
Your first-round pick
32?
didn't exceed 30 yards receiving in any game.
Oh, yeah, I
That's
can't name someone behind him.
And then the other bad is just it's aging on defense as well, with all the free agents that they have.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a different iteration of this team. And ultimately, I do think Brady's back, but a different version of it. I'm excited to see. Patriots receive a lot of hate from teams across the league, and I think a lot of that is rooted in jealousy. But I'm excited. I'm amped to see a different New England unit, and that we might see that in 2020.
Yeah,
that could be fun. As we close, I'm hearing in my ear that Tua Tagovailoa, Tua.
I haven't learned how to pronounce it yet.
Tagovailoa has declared for the NFL draft.
Oh, they already got a graphic ready, too.
I have nothing to say about it. I have not watched him. It's been a great season of watching no college football.
I watched a few games.
On my end, but that's what I'll be doing.
I don't scout till the end of the
next week or
year,
two.
so I don't have an opinion right now.
Good for Tua. Hope he gets a lot of money and happiness.
So that's going to go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it actually is kind of interesting because the whole injury thing, and then the Dolphins need a 1-year layover anyways because they have Fitzpatrick for 1 more year. So,
well, that's going to do it
the
for
Dolphins.
us.
Makes sense.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back on Wednesday. Wednesday, we're recording the preview episode of this podcast because we have 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday. We'll be previewing all of those. Plus, I'm sure some more coaching hires will happen. We'll be covering them all on the Wednesday episode of this podcast. So for Daigle, for Ian, I am Josh. We'll talk to y'all soon. See ya.